Hello everyone, welcome back to the YouTube channel. June 7th, 1942. 11:58 p.m. A cold fog rolled across the quiet shoreline of Battleship Bay, England, as a lone figure stared into the dark, restless water. The wind carried the sharp smell of salt and metal, and somewhere behind him, inside a dim wooden operations hut, a group of senior officers waited for an answer that felt dangerously close to impossible. Inside that hut stood Brigadier Hugh Furster Kindersley, and next to him, the man everyone was silently depending on. Not a general, not a naval commander, but a slightly hunched British engineer with round spectacles, a weary expression, and a brain sharp enough to change the course of the entire war. Professor Alan Beckett. He didn't look like someone who could alter history. But tonight, the weight of the Allied invasion rested squarely on his shoulders. You can almost feel the tension in the cramped room. Maps spread across the table, pins marking every beach on the French coast. A faint buzzing from a flickering lamp overhead, and woven into the stillness, one terrifying unspoken question. How do you invade a continent when every single port you need is controlled by the enemy? Storming the beaches would be only the beginning. Holding them would be a miracle. But supplying millions of soldiers, millions of gallons of fuel, countless tanks, trucks, artillery and food without a functioning port. Impossible. The Germans knew this. They fortified every harbor along the coast. They placed demolition charges on the docks, ready to destroy them, the tow. Moment Allied troops appeared, so Churchill demanded the unthinkable. Don't capture a port, build one, tow it across the English Channel, assemble it under enemy. Birmingham, a floating harbor, a man-made port the size of a city built entirely out of steel. Concrete and a level of engineering optimism, bordering on insanity. Most officers thought the idea was absurd. Some thought it was suicide. A few thought it might be possible if the Allies had years to plan. Beckett finally stepped forward. The room quieted. He moved to the map and traced his finger along the Normandy coastline. Then in a soft, almost tired voice he said words that shifted the entire atmosphere. We will build the harbors ourselves, and we will make the sea obey us. Silence, because these weren't the words of a dreamer. They were the words of a man who had spent years studying the sea, its violence, its rhythm, its unpredictable moods. A man who believed the war could not be won unless the ocean itself was conquered. Beckett laid out his vision. Hundreds of enormous concrete caissons, each massive enough to rival the hull of a battleship. Floating roadways that moved with the tides. A revolutionary anchoring system flexible enough to survive storms that had sunk ships for centuries. This, he said, tapping a sketch of a floating pier, is the key. A roadway that rises and falls with the sea. It will not break. It will not fail. The officers leaned in. Not because they understood the engineering, most didn't, but because for the first time in a long time, they felt hope. One officer finally asked the question everyone feared. But can it be done in time? Beckett removed his glasses. The wind rattled the hut. Boots creaked on the wooden floor. His answer would decide the future of Europe. That depends on one thing. A pause, a long, deep breath. What thing? Another officer asked. Beckett pointed toward the dark, unpredictable water outside. Whether the sea decides to cooperate, and in that moment, every man in the room understood the truth. The English Channel was the greatest threat of all. But if Beckett could tame, if his absurd floating harbors could hold, then the Allies wouldn't just land on Normandy. They would pour into France by the millions. The invasion of the century had just been given its impossible blueprint. June 10th, 1942, the sun hadn't risen. Yet over the British coastline. But the shipyard was already alive with movement. Sparks flew from welding torches. Cranes groaned under the weight of steel beams. Men shouted orders through the cold morning air. And in the middle of this organized chaos stood Alan Beckett, staring at something that looked more like a piece of science. Fiction than a wartime project. A floating roadway, one that could bend, twist, rise, and fall with the tide yet never snap. Engineers around him whispered that it was impossible. Some said it was a waste of time. Others said the sea would tear it apart within minutes. But Beckett didn't argue. He simply stepped onto the structure himself. His boots echoed on the metal plates. The morning waves rocked it gently beneath him. It held. You can almost see the moment when doubt turned into belief. The young engineers standing nearby exchanged looks. A few even smiled, because this was no longer a sketch on a table. It was real. It was floating, and it was the first piece of a harbor the size of a city. Behind them, workers hammered steel frames for the massive concrete caissons, structures so immense they blocked out the rising sun. These phoenix caissons would be the backbone of the harbor walls. When flooded, they would sink into place, forming breakwaters, capable of calming the brutal, the waves of the English Channel. Each one was a fortress. Each one weighed thousands of tons. And soon they would be towed into one of the most unpredictable bodies of water on Earth. Beckett watched as one caisson's mold was removed, revealing a towering grey block of concrete. The workers around him paused to catch their breath. Even they seemed surprised by its size. One officer stepped forward and muttered quietly, "Professor, how do we move something that large?" Beckett didn't answer right away. He looked at the massive structure, as if studying a stubborn animal he was determined to tame. Then he said calmly, "With faith, and a very large tugboat." A few men laughed, but they all knew the truth. Moving these giants across the channel would be dangerous. Too dangerous. One storm could scatter them like children's toys. And even if they survived the journey, assembling them off the coast of Normandy under enemy fire seemed almost suicidal. Yet the work continued, day after day, night after night. The shipyards became factories of hope. Steel arrived by the thousands of tons. Concrete poured around the clock. Britain was building an entire artificial port, 2 of them. In fact, each 1 miles long and designed to handle non-stop supply. Flow. Every measurement mattered, every bolt, every cable, every... One failure could doom the entire invasion. And then came the moment no one expected. Storm rolled over the shipyard one night. Howling winds, violent waves, rain that hammered the shore like artillery. Crews scrambled to secure the prototypes. Beckett stood in the rain watching the floating roadway twist under the pressure of the storm. It flexed. It dipped. It lifted. But it did not break. When dawn finally came, the storm clouds lifted to reveal the strange metal road still floating calmly. Bent, scratched, soaked, but alive. A junior engineer approached Beckett, eyes wide. "Sir!" It survived. Beckett nodded slowly. He wiped the rain from his glasses, and a rare smile appeared on his face. "If it can survive this, it can survive the Channel." Word spread quickly. Officers from London arrived to inspect the prototypes. Admirals walked the floating roadways themselves. Generals inspected the caissons. At every turn, the same feeling was growing. This might actually work. But then came a question none of them were prepared for. "How fast can you build enough of these to supply the entire invasion?" Beckett's smile faded because he knew the truth. They weren't racing against engineering problems anymore. They were racing against time. And somewhere in Berlin, German intelligence had already begun to suspect that the Allies were planning something enormous. Beckett looked out at the waves again. The same waves that had nearly broken British confidence for years. Now the question was simple. Could they build a harbor faster than the enemy could prepare for it? The future of the invasion depended on that answer.